Welcome to Chris and Jen in the Morning,
where it's always morning somewhere. I'm Chris.
and I'm Jen, and we are so excited to be here today with you. We have a super exciting topic. It's a real upper.
It is. We're going to talk about death today.
Don't turn off the video just yet. We want to talk about living well and the art of accepting death so that we don't have to live in fear of it or waste our time while living, trying to avoid death. That's what we're going to talk about today, and super excited to dig into that. We've both worn appropriate clothing for this. If you're listening and not watching, we're both in black. So
we did not coordinate the outfits.
I thought about it, and I was like, nah, he's probably going to do the same thing. That or he's going to show up in some like bright color. So today we're going to talk about the art of living well or accepting death, or, whatever you want to call that. And before we get to that, let's hop into our gratitude moment.
Yes.
And this morning, I just want to share how grateful I am to be a mom. My kiddo had a birthday this weekend, and I really, truly, they're 23 years old now. And so for more than 23 years, I have been a mom, and it has been the most difficult job I have ever had in my life and probably will ever have. And yet the job I have absolutely loved the most, or the role, I should say. It's not a job. It's a act of love. I just am so grateful for this human. I'm so grateful to get to be a part of their life. When they were little, they said to me that they picked me out of the baby cloud. They picked Ace and I out of the baby cloud and chose us to be their parents. I have not let them forget that, because I just think it's a beautifully sweet thought or idea. Every year on their birthday, I thank them for picking us out of the baby cloud, because I could not have asked for a better kid. I'm just incredibly grateful to get to be mom. That's what I'm grateful for this week.
I would agree. I think they are top notch, in my opinion.
Top notch.
And I will say I appreciate being able to live, or not live, but like see today's times through their eyes. When I was there, like we had the opportunity to chat about things and, pop culture, but also things happening in the world. And it's just very interesting to see things through eyes that are in a different place, that are like in life, but also like physically in the world.
They're a real hipster, so they definitely like embody that term in that, taking the alternative view. It brings some joy. Yes, it is a fun way to see the world sometimes.
Well, I am so happy. I did text them on their birthday. Don't know if they told you that, but I sent a little side message and said, hey, happy birthday.
I love that.
I'm like their big brother, so it's important that I share that with them.
I'm not your mom. I'm not that much older than you. I think 4 years older?
Look, either...
Am I 4 years older than you? I don't even know. I don't even know the answer.
I don't
know how old you are.
I'm young.
I know how old I am, I think.
I never know how old I am. Literally every year I have to do the math, because I don't, it is not one of those things that I remember. And I think a lot of it goes to the conversation that we're going to have today, as to why
you just don't want to remember. It's the art of forgetting strategically.
Right.
Yeah.
My gratitude moment is, I think you and I have talked about this before, where if I had life to do over again, got to hit that reset button, I think I would be interested in a career in anthropology. I think.
Oh, really?
Yes. I love learning about different cultures. I love learning about different religions. I love understanding how people live life, not just in the space that I live life, but around the world. And so I really appreciate the topic we're going to have today, because I think it pulls in a lot of different aspects of how people and communities and cultures see death. But I have also been very fortunate to, as I've moved to the city and have been exposed to more religions and cultures beyond what I was exposed to where I was living in Texas, I have learned so much, and I so appreciate people who are willing to engage in conversations and just educate me. And I think a lot of that comes from just my natural curiosity. And one of them is one of my colleagues who I've worked with for several years now. And I remember one of the first times I was asking all of these questions of her about holidays that I've never celebrated. And it dawned on me like, wow, Chris, you've been asking a lot of questions in the past like 15 minutes. So I told him like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. It's just my curiosity. And she was so understanding. She's like, no, I love being able to share this, like have this conversation. So that individual, and then also my husband, Frank, his family has very close roots to Mexico. And so understanding that culture and how they deal
Yeah.
with death has like just been a very recent thing that we've been going through. So I I
Yeah,
have found it very appreciative.
your background is showing just a little bit of a new celebration that you got to try this week,
Yeah.
right?
So this year, for the first time, we set up a ofrenda for our family members who are no longer with us.
Yeah.
Frank's dad passed away in September, and although he lived a very long life and has left a great legacy, loss of any kind is always hard. And we'll
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But we decided this year to honor him and the many family members that are no longer with us, that we would set up our first ever ofrenda for Dia de los Muertos. And so we've spent the week kind of curating. We've never done it before, so we actually got this kit called the Day of the Dead Ofrenda Kit from Colors Mexicanos in Chicago. So we can drop a link
Is
to
it
it in
colors or
case.
colores?
Sure, Colores. Sure. I just found them online. So, but it
And
sends
I'm
the
so
entire.
excited to hear about this experience that you've had for the first time of going through this celebration of Dia de los Muertos and of setting up an ofrenda. And there's like a kind of a ritual to this, right?
Yes, like maybe not so much ritual, but more of a like there is a reason you do it. So like
Yeah.
I don't think there's like any like tied in like spiritual religious
No,
things to it.
I don't mean a ritual like that. I mean like so of course, I've watched Coco. So that's where my level of expertise is when it comes to Dia de los Muertos and the Book of Life, which I actually is one of my favorite movies. But I think, am I right in saying that the idea is you keep a memory of your loved ones
Correct.
alive and you celebrate them and come back and like it's this kind of ritual of spending time with them, and whether or not you believe that their spirit actually crosses over and comes back to spend time with you, or whether it's just taking some time to meditate and think on them, I think it's
Yeah.
a really beautiful way to honor those that have come before and, help like ease the pain of losing someone.
Yeah, it's definitely, we found ourselves spending like a lot of time in the remembrance of
Yeah.
them, especially like setting up you put things like their favorite treats, snacks, things like that. And so as we were going through the week and being purposeful about like going and getting certain things to add to the ofrenda, it's just been a fun experience for us for the first time doing it. And then also getting to share like stories with one another about our loved ones as we've put it together. So it's a great way to honor those who are no longer with us, great way to remember them. I'm so grateful that like Frank has been open to like sharing this with me, and
Yeah.
also us learning about it together, because although they didn't have like a formal one, they always had like the pictures of their loved ones. So it was
Yeah.
an opportunity for us to kind of do it for the first time since we've become a family unit.
And what I love about Dia de los Muertos is that it is not this like really sad, heavy holiday. It is
Right.
this bright, happy celebration. The idea that you can look at death and the loss of people, and even just staring at the concept of death, knowing that it's reality, and yet we try to ignore it or avoid it as much as possible.
Yeah.
So the idea that there is culturally this celebration around that, I think, is really fascinating to me. And that's part of what we want to talk about today. I think in America, culturally, we have this like habit of avoiding death. We all know that we are intellectually and at some point emotionally we accept that death is real, that our lives are finite, and yet we have this habit of just sort of ignoring that, not planning for death, not thinking about death, not thinking about the death of others. It's very taboo topic to talk about. And even when somebody passes, like you show up for the funeral, but then when you interact with them, it's like this awkward, should I ask them how they're doing? Should I not? Should I mention it? Should I not? And a lot of people tend to like just avoid
Correct.
individuals altogether, not because they don't care, but because they're so uncomfortable with how do you say this and how do you interact? And it feels like the elephant in the room. And so one of the things that we've been talking about and that I've really been thinking about is what could be an alternative? How do we take a different approach to understanding or accepting death instead of trying to avoid it?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, none of us are going to be able to dodge it, right?
It's very true. And I think it is one of those, as I was like reflecting on my comfortability in this, because I was very surprised whenever I read that this death is actually one of the taboo topics to talk about. Like, think of,
That surprised you?
yes, it did, because like I would not associate death with religion, politics.
It's just uncomfortable. It makes people, at least here in America, where you also grew up, makes people very uncomfortable.
Yes,
It's not polite to talk about things that make people
correct.
uncomfortable. So we're going to be really impolite today. We're going to talk about things that make us uncomfortable and why does it make us uncomfortable and what alternative could there be? We all are going to have to face it within our lives. So either for ourselves or for others that we love. So, one of the things I've been thinking about is like, what is it that I feel when I think about death? And I think one of the biggest, it's a hard question for me to answer, tap into my feelings, but I think one of the biggest things that comes up for me is fear. There's like this fear of death. Do you relate to that?
I personally don't. Whenever I think of death, I don't fear it, and I like have really explored as to why I don't. Maybe
Like
when
for
I was
yourself or for others? Do you fear the death of others as well? Or,
no, no, because to me, and I, like I said, I've done a lot of thinking about this. And when I
yeah.
think back to kind of one of my first careers or my first jobs, like when I was in high school, I worked at a local church and we had a lot of funerals there. I also experienced like tragic losses of a classmate between my freshman year of high school and my sophomore year. And then also my freshman into sophomore year of college. So I have like death has been something that I feel like I was around quite a lot in my younger years and seeking to understand. And the second person who tragically died my freshman into sophomore year of college, she and I like volunteered together. I like at this church that I'm talking about, and that one like shook me to my core. Like it
Yeah.
was really
I'm so
hard.
sorry.
I fell
Yeah.
into depression, like really struggled with this idea and trying to like um find this balance between my religion and like this young person who was doing all of these great things in the world and all this opportunity. It was just like really, really hard. So I think like as I have grown to become an adult, I have maybe have experiences or things to tap into that others have not had in their lifetime, to which I am grateful for because I don't fear this idea of death. I see it as like it is part of the living experience, if you will.
Yeah.
Like probably not
Yeah.
the best way to say that, but it's part of life. Like you just as like you come into this world, we also only have so much time here.
Well, it sounds like you are further along in the journey than I am, and then probably most of us are. So, you can be our spirit guide in this conversation. But as I think about like what are the feelings I have around death, one of them is fear, and one of them is probably denial, like which is the first stage of grief. And I do think that it is normal for us to grieve the idea of us not being here forever. But or obviously for others, we grieve when they pass on. And the first stage of grief is denial. And some of us spend a little longer in denial than others. And so I think culturally, that's part of how we're conditioned is just to ignore death. or the idea of death and kind of live in this denial of it because we don't really know how to make sense of it. And it's
Right.
really hard to accept something that there there really is no way for us to understand. I mean, once you're dead, that's it. So we can't experience it. It's really hard to understand something you can't experience, and it's
Right.
really hard to accept something you can't understand. I think, death is just one of those kind of paradoxes for us.
It's
But
also in some cultures, like, you don't talk about like negative things like
mm,
death
mm.
because it brings it. Like it like
Oh, like speak the name, kind of makes it taboo. So I think about why do I fear death or why do we fear death in general? And in some of the reading that I was doing, and there's this free course actually that Yale offers through their free course programs where it's titled Death. The course is Death, and you can listen to the lectures of the professor and read the readings along the syllabus, etc. Um, and so I was listening to some of those lectures as well. And, some of the reasons that we fear death, we're afraid of the act or process of dying. So, not really death itself, but the
right, the
experience
process.
of getting to death.
Yeah.
We're afraid of what happens after death because we just don't know, or because we've been brought up in a religion that tells us something terrible might happen after death, or we may not be with people that we love after
Yeah.
death, suggesting there's an existence after death, but we don't really know what that existence will be like. We're afraid of what or who we leave behind. So if we die and we leave behind, children or loved ones, we can be afraid of what will happen to them, or who will care for them, afraid of not fulfilling our purpose or reaching our potential in life. I think another episode entirely, but this whole idea of us feeling like we have to have some purpose to fulfill is also a very American concept. And honestly, I think it's one that was planted to get us to work. But,
If you're a conspiracy theorist, that may be a route you go down.
but feeling like we have to find our purpose. What if we don't find it? What if we don't
Yeah.
fulfill our purpose? Or what if, we had so much potential, but we never reached that potential? There could be a fear of missing out. FOMO is real. And once I die, I can no longer experience all the great things that are going to happen. Not enough time to accomplish all of the things that we desire. So, particularly, this was talked about in this one of these Yale lectures that I was listening to, where they talked about this concept of our time is so finite compared to all of the meaningful things that we could do. And so you have to pick which are the things that you're going to focus on.
Right.
And what if you pick wrong and you don't end up accomplishing all the things that you decided you wanted to accomplish? And so we fear death because it may cut our time short or obstruct our goals. I think also there's like this fear of not knowing when it's going to happen. And so like the fear of surprise for people that don't like to be surprised. Death will come at any moment or far into the future, but it is not a moment that I get to particularly control. And
Right.
so, how do you prepare for something when you don't know when it will happen? And that can be true of our own death or the death of others. So, I think there are a lot of reasons that we fear death. And for me, I think spending some time really thinking about what is it that I'm afraid of? What is it that sparks that fear in me? And then let's go down the path and really spend time thinking about that, not in a like a morose way, but more of in a like inquisitive way of, well, why am I afraid of that? To kind of dispel the fear a little
Right.
bit and move past it so that we can move along the journey towards, being able to accept the fact that death is something that all of us will deal with within
Right.
our lives.
It's very true. And I do think, like, of all those things that you said, like, the one that we really truly have no control over is the when.
Yeah.
The when, the where, the how. Like, we don't get to choose that. And so, like, having a fear of that, totally understandable, especially if you don't like surprises.
Mm.
But then I do think a lot of those others that you discussed are things that, like, if we do seek to understand it, maybe we can feel a little bit more comfortable in trying to achieve those things and trying to seek happiness and purpose in our lives.
Well, I do think that we do feel a sense of not having control over this. And some people do take that control into their own hands for
They
themselves
do.
or for others, not neither of which, are healthy. But I think that we do tend to fear what we cannot control,
Right.
and knowing that this is inevitable and it is not really within our control is something that we as humans struggle with, because that is, if you look at humanity in general, we try to make sense of things, we try and put things in order, we try and minimize threats, and
Right.
if you see death as a threat, then that is something that you're going to try and minimize. Or if you can't, because we also accept that it's inevitable, you just ignore it. We also don't want to live in a way that we're not really embracing life, because we're just afraid of what's going to happen, right? And I think sometimes when we ignore death, we forget to live in a way that respects and honors that time is finite. We don't say the things that we want to say because we think, oh, they're too emotional, or they're too sappy, or they're all of the things. And then when you have a loved one that is getting to that place of passing, oftentimes people will share things that they need to share in order to not feel like they've left something unresolved. But sometimes you have regrets about not saying the things that you wish you would have said. The songs have been written about that.
Yeah. Books, movies, TV
Yeah,
shows, like the whole
all kinds
gamut.
of things. When we accept that death is something that is inevitable, that is a part of life, it is a healthy part of life, it's a part of the circle of life, then we can start living in a way where we really, as a part of that acceptance, also honor the feelings that we have instead of putting them off because we're ignoring the fact that none of us will live forever. So I think, Chris, one of the things we wanted to talk about is different cultural and religious views on death.
Yeah. So I think it's really important just to understand that, like, death isn't treated the same everywhere. Not every culture, not every religion looks at this the same way. Not just like the person who has died, but also like how you honor and remember them and how you care for the one who has passed and care for the families that have passed. So for Dia de los Muertos, it's really about the souls of the deceased being honored and inviting them back. And death is woven into this idea of life rather than a separate thing. So it's you are inviting them back in, and it's not that you are like sitting at the it's it's about them coming back and experiencing your life with you. We talked about how it's not meant to be a sad thing. It's not meant to you go to it and you cry every night. You go and you celebrate and you talk to them and you act as if they are in the room. It's just it's an opportunity to remember and kind of sit in those memories. It's been kind of unique for me and Frank because we've not done this before. So we've been able to share stories that we've not shared about these individuals with each other before,
Yeah.
just because some of them weren't even around whenever we were together. So it's been fun to get to experience like his life with them in this experience.
Get to kind of reflect on the joy.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the other rituals that we talked about, a religious ritual of reading the rosary every night. For how many nights was that?
9 nights. So in at his like in Catholicism, I don't know if every Catholic honors this or does this, or if it's just specific to like his family. But first 9 nights after the person is laid to rest, you then read the rosary, and it's remembrance. I was not brought up Catholic, so I
Yeah.
did not understand the symbolism or what was behind it. But it's a ritual. It's an opportunity for people to come back and honor, remember, kind of plead for their acceptance, their soul, the remembrance of them. And there's this other component of it that it brings people into the home to also like support and love the family for several nights following.
Yeah, I think oftentimes when we think about death, we tend to focus on the things that we can't understand fully. We can't fully prove or know,
Right.
however much we believe it. Like what will happen after death? Does your soul become detached from the physical and still exist, or does it not? I think religion is one of the ways that we learn to cope with death. If we think about what existence might be like for us beyond death,
Yeah.
then that gives us something to kind of hang on to, and a positive thing to experience. but that kind of makes it feel a little less unknown. I also think though that many of these like beliefs and rituals are set up as a support of those that remain, and we're not focused on that or thinking about that when we think about death. I do think that that is the value in spending time participating in these rituals. It's
Right.
that sense of community. I was watching a show, it was a K-drama recently, and there was a line in there that it was about death. It just happened to be about that. I didn't do that on purpose, but terribly sad. I mean, I was just like crying, which I don't tend to do at shows, but it was very moving. But this individual's brother passes away, and this individual is just really sad because that was the only family he had left. I just wasn't prepared for that. His friend says to him, who is the one that is always the the most impacted by death? And then he says it's the bereaved every time. That just really stuck with me because it's so obvious, and yet we don't really think about it
Right.
because we're often thinking about the individual that died and what happened, or at least me, anyways. When you think about it, it's really how do we care for those that are left behind and support them in a way that can help us accept the death that we may not have been prepared to accept yet. I
Mm,
think a lot of these rituals support that.
exactly. There's a lot of Jewish traditions as well that really have a formal mourning period to it.
Yeah.
A lot of it is about supporting the family, being there with them. I think a lot of religions that have a community aspect to it,
Yeah.
a lot of them have that focus on supporting the families, the loved ones, those who are closest to the individual for that reason.
Yeah.
We say all this right with the understanding that it's not the same every time. There are tragedies that truly happen, and it can hurt in a different way than something that's expected, and vice versa. Like, it just,
Yeah.
every one of them is different. And I think that's what also makes this concept of death hard
Hard.
to process, is like we can't be prepared for it. There's no there's no course, there's
Yeah.
no feelings to block, because it you just don't know what you're gonna expect.
Yeah. While some cultures really focus on what happens after death, other cultures focus on it being a part of the cycle and a return to the earth, and like this respect of um, like we can't returning back to where you came from,
Yes.
and the kind of whole of not even just humanity but the whole of existence continuing to travel on, which I think is a really beautiful thing to think about. I think when we put ourselves in the perspective of I am but a small dot on a very long timeline in a
Yeah.
very large universe, and while that feels really insignificant, which is not how we tend to think of ourselves. We think of ourselves as very significant or
Yeah, of
important,
course.
right? Not self-important, but just like we're looking for our purpose and our meaning and all these things. Then you think about like the scope with which it's like an ant living in the world with their perspective versus our perspective,
Right.
right?
I think that's a great example because it's the world that as we perceive it,
Yeah.
and it's our lived experience. Of course, we're going to think we're an important
Well, it's
cog in the
important to us.
machine.
Importance is really just about perspective,
Right.
right? I think remembering that we are a part of something much, much bigger than us is an important piece of insight to bring in.
Right. Which I also think is a really important reason to go beyond our immediate what we know,
Yeah.
because many of those beliefs are considered, like many indigenous communities, non-Western cultures, like they hold those beliefs in being part of something much larger than what we are.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the study of those things because it does bring in another perspective, another way to see the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just getting like Lion King vibes, the circle of life.
Yeah.
And who didn't cry at the death of, Simba's dad? I mean, I don't know. I did.
Every these 90s child was scarred by Mufasa's death.
Scarred. I see what you did there. So of course, as I was studying this and like preparing yesterday for this conversation, what felt a little more comfortable to me versus sort of the religious and emotional side of this was the logical side. And so naturally, I drifted towards reading some articles that would use logic to kind of think about or consider death. Although I do think it is another way of just trying to, make ourselves become comfortable for those of us that are, a little more comfortable in the thinking side versus the feeling
Yeah.
side of life. But Epicurus was a philosopher that talked a lot about death, and I think gets misconstrued or misunderstood a lot. That he was, very cavalier about life. But really, what he was trying to say is, life is, we were nothing before we got here, and you cannot imagine what it is like to be nothing because we just can't understand it. We can't, conceptualize that. But the world existed just fine before we got here. And so in the end, we are going to be nothing again. And we can't imagine that. We can't really imagine what that is like to be nothing. And so, it is just as it was before we got here. And I think we all want to I think many people want to make their mark on the world so that it is not like they were from nothing and they returned to nothing and their life was kind of pointless.
Yeah.
So it's that fear of being pointless that comes back in. But again, that's where I would say maybe we're focused on the wrong things. Like, we have ingrained in us, we are supposed to have this purpose. What if, like, the whole purpose is just to be happy? And that was the Epicurean philosophy, is like the whole point of life is just to try and be happy. Now, Epicurus's point of view on this was that moderation creates happiness, because if you go in the excess, then you have to deal with the counterbalancing parts of that. So you go have a
Yeah.
big raging party and then you deal with, a hangover later. And so his philosophy was more just live in moderation. I don't know that I agree with that. I think while every action seems to have an equal and opposite reaction, I'm not sure that I'm always striving to just kind of be, in moderation is not in my personality. Let's be
You
honest.
don't naturally gravitate
No.
towards it.
But I do think that, it is really interesting to reflect on, like, how do I fear something that, can't even be conceived? And so, do I really fear it? Or am I really fearing something else? Am I fearing the fact that I don't understand it, that I don't know when? Where are your thoughts and feelings really directed towards? So that was a really interesting point of view. And there's a lot of philosophers who spent time over their lives thinking about death and
Right.
philosophizing about death. But I would just suggest that if that's what we're focusing on, we're probably missing the point, because
Yeah.
why would we spend our time, whether it's through religion or culture or, philosophy, fixating on something that then will become nothing, when we know that our time is finite? And what I really am drawn to, and I think part of what, inspires our podcast in general, is this idea of spending our life chasing joy and happiness and trying to live in a way that supports as much happiness for us and others as possible. And so in that way, I really appreciated a lot of the sort of reading that I was doing around Epicurus's opinions on death.
I do
I know
find it interesting, the idea of, like, we don't really think about what we were before we came into the world. So I had never, like, really heard
yeah.
that perspective. So, like, attaching that, like, pre-life and post-life, I've not really thought about that. And that is an interesting, like, I don't even know if they're dichotomies, are they? Like, it's a interesting perspective to
It's
bring
an
in.
interesting perspective, yeah. So there was a Roman poet, Critias. I may be saying his name completely wrong. It's Lucretius. And he basically said, if you don't fear your pre-existence, then logically it follows that you shouldn't fear your post-existence either. And when I read that, I was like, oh, I feel calmer all of a sudden, because that is sound logic. You're returning to what you were, the nothingness that you were before. I'm not afraid of my pre-existence. And so why would I be afraid of my
Right.
post existence?
But I do see, like, so getting to the taboo part of the conversation,
Yeah.
like, people who are religious do believe there is something after. So to call it nothing would be a hard conversation to engage
Yeah.
in if someone's like not open to the idea behind whatever that nothing may be. They may literally be saying nothing, or nothing as in it just depends on what you believe. I do remember I told you I like grew up religious. I remember sitting in on a sermon one time where the pastor was talking about like the things that we do in the world, how we do leave an impact and how we make others feel, and how we can help build people up or tear them down, and
Yeah.
associating it with like Jesus's walk on the earth. And um, I just remember like something that really stuck with me because I'd never heard anyone say this before was this idea of if I do get to my death and my actions and things that I have done get me into heaven, great. Like I'm in a great place. I'm with this maker that I truly believe in and I cherish. But if I get to my end and it's just dark and there is nothing, at least I've helped people. At least I have poured into people's lives in positive ways. I just thought like it was a super interesting way to kind of look at that conversation because there are people who, just
Yeah.
believe when you die, you die. Like that's it. It's hard to like sometimes engage in those conversations because people don't want to talk about what could be
Well,
coming after.
and I think for me, I obviously grew up with religion as well, which was very outspoken on death. And where I grew up, there was a lot of using the fear of what would happen after death to sort of control your behavior in a really assertive way. One of the things I was really taught to fear was death. If you didn't live in such a way that you were deemed worthy, and that worthiness is really determined, they say, not by people, but then they act and behave as if it was people
Right.
determining that worthiness, then you're going to burn in hell forever. There was really a lot of focus put on that. I did spend a lot of time as a child and growing up as an adolescent fearing death and what would happen after death. I do think that that's a tool that's used by some religions in order to control people during life here. Absolutely has a lot of power. I also think, just like you said, if at the end of life it is just dark and there is nothingness, why does the lack of existence for us equate to darkness or nothingness? There's a novelist, Vladimir Nabokov, who put it in his memoirs. Common sense tells us that our existence is but a brief crack of light between two eternities of darkness. While on one hand, it's a beautiful saying, on another hand, like, why do we continue to associate nothingness with darkness? Because we grow up, just innately fearing the dark. That's like something of the human condition, right? When you're a child, you're afraid of the dark. We do things during the day under the sun. We associate scary things happening in the night or in the dark or with the lights off or all those things. And so why do we associate death with darkness? I think this subliminal messaging that we keep offering is really a nod towards our fear of what we don't understand. We say, we don't understand this. It looks like darkness to us. Darkness is scary. We just kind of perpetuate this idea that death is dark and scary. I would contend that, like, the color black is not the absence of color. It is all of the colors put together. That's how you get to black.
Okay.
That's just a little bit of art knowledge for you there. I thought that was really interesting, but I think we fear death in part because we equate death to this darkness and that it's the absence of light. And I wonder, like, is that really how we should be thinking about it? Or should we be thinking about death more not in terms of light and dark?
Right. I mean, yes, I do think we absolutely should. But I do like my counterpoint, not that we need a counterpoint here, but like there are like religious ideologies of going into the light. So like just as much as we fear and are afraid of the dark, like I think in some religions or ways of people seeing it, or as people have explained their like death but come back from it experience is like, oh, it's like a light and I'm feeling like drawn towards it. Don't go towards the light. Like, so I say that flippantly, but like in a way of I think everyone has like their own interpretation of it, but it's that existence. Like it's the existence of, or not knowing what's beyond our existence that I think is that thing that people are afraid of.
Yeah.
And it
One
is,
and fear is drawn up by imagination, right? Some facts, but imagination as well. Oftentimes when we're in that kind of amygdala engaged fear state, we're imagining all of the worst case scenarios
yeah.
because again, we are built to mitigate threat responses. We are not built for just constant happiness. Let's talk about how the brain and the body process death and loss. So when someone close to us dies, our brain struggles because attachment systems still expect the person to be present. There's often this thing that your brain will do to help you cope where it just sort of takes that piece of knowledge and puts it somewhere else. I was reading this story about this man who said he lost his wife Mary, and he would leave the house every day. And he knew he had lost his wife. Mary wasn't there. But every day until he walked back through the door, he was really expecting Mary to be there. And so he would experience things and he would be like, oh, I can't wait to go tell Mary about this. And I can't wait to go tell Mary about this. And then he would get home and it would be like this, oh my gosh, but Mary's not here. And
Yeah.
it's not like he couldn't understand that. It was just this coping mechanism within his brain to help him process this loss, because when we don't move to acceptance, we live in that state of ignorance basically and
Well,
denial.
right. And we've talked about how like our brain has these default modes, like it hardwire itself into
Yeah.
these networks, and so that way there's not a lot of like active thought that goes into it. Our brain just starts moving through it. And I think like that's a perfect example of like when that default network is kind of engaged because you're excited about sharing with this person, and your body and your brain is still learning and is still reorganizing with this person no longer being present. And like when my grandmother before she died had dementia, and so she and I used to cook and bake together all of the time. So anytime like I'd be making something or using one of her recipes and couldn't remember an exact something, I used to call her up. And the further her dementia progressed, the more I started to find that she couldn't answer my questions, and she would always just tell me, well, just do whatever your heart tells you to do. And you know what? If you don't like it or it doesn't work out, then you know next time you do it, you got to change it a little bit. And so when she actually
I
passed
loved
away,
her.
Grandma Judy.
I loved her.
So whenever she did pass away, it was like one of those things that my brain had already kind of put those
Yeah.
things into place where it's like, oh, this is where I would usually call grandma if I had a question, but I can't. And so now it's become more of an opportunity for me to remember her and sit with those memories. And it takes the brain time to process that, and truly like all the little things are those times. I mean, think of how many times you and I text or call each other throughout the week. Imagine if one of us was no longer there. Like, it would be hard.
I want to live in denial of that right now. I don't want to think
Okay.
about it.
We're still on a journey. Okay, I
I
see. I
want to live
see.
in denial of that right now. 'Cause I would just be devastated. So in this story of this man and his wife, Mary, who passed, he was seeking help in dealing with his emotions about that, which I think is really healthy
Uh-huh.
to, look for some additional assistance in helping you through things. Oftentimes help is knowing being told what you may already know, but in a way that helps you accept it or move forward in it,
Yeah.
or helping you express the things that you already know that you're not paying attention to. But I think so in this story, what he ended up doing was saying, you know what? It's okay for me to want to share things with Mary. And the point is not whether or not Mary can still hear me or not, because what needs to happen is I need to share, not Mary needs to hear. And so I'm going to continue talking to Mary and sharing these things with her for as long as I feel like it, so that I can accept that she's gone, but also, have this sense of continuing to share with her because I
Yeah.
shared everything about my day with her. And, I thought about that, and I thought about this Dia de los Muertos, the tradition. And I thought, that's such a lovely sentiment of I want to have time to spend and share with the people that I no longer have here to share with. Because
Yeah.
sometimes sharing is about the other person that's listening, receiving the information. But as expressives, I think you and I both have come to accept that sometimes sharing is about the person that's sharing, just getting to express it.
Exactly. Exactly. And I do think like when we embrace this idea of someone is no longer here, that does not mean that they are gone. Like, yes, they are not physically here, but you still have all of those memories. You still have all those experiences. And I do truly believe that grief is very personal, and the way
Yeah.
that you get over it and work through it, not get over it, that's not the right phrase. Like, it's work through it. You work through it, and it's going to look and feel different for everyone. And so maybe like if you're finding it tough to work through those things, going and finding someone to talk to and help kind of process and give you ways to work through it and try things and find that thing that works for you is really important.
Yeah. I also think like what you and I are doing now is really important. So, not waiting until the grief comes
Yeah.
to try and do your hardest work of having to prepare yourself and accept for yourself something that you weren't ready to accept, but instead to think about preparing ahead of time. And so while when we think about preparing for death, oftentimes we think about, what does a funeral look like, and what does, do you have a will, and all of those things. But I think they're important things, but I also think that preparing for death looks like making sure that you are living in a way that you're not going to leave things unsaid that need to be said. And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean you need to say everything you think. Like, it's really thinking about, what is it? Is there something you need to say? Is there a way that you need to start showing up that you're not showing up? Is there something that you need to do to help prepare, whether that death comes soon or whether it comes far from now? It will eventually come. That's a part of the journey that I've been on, is how do I stop avoiding death because I don't understand it and start thinking about it a little more practically. Now, I'm not sure this journey is going to take me many years to figure out whether I will ever reach that destination before my time ends or not. I don't know, but
It may be a lifetime journey.
it probably is. Talk a little bit about cycle notion. What is that?
So it's this idea that if we see death as an end, like it is no more, that's it. Like we no longer have access. It's all over. The brain can look at that as a threat, and so we try to avoid it. And
Mm,
we try not to engage in those conversations, and we try not to think about it because we see it as a threat. And so as a threat, we stay away, we avoid it. And so I think more if we think of death as part of that cycle, like I was talking about in the beginning, like
yeah.
understanding that part of life is death, and not just ours, but the people around us. Like it's part of life. Our bodies and our minds and like our nervous system and all the things that like create those endorphins and those stress hormones, like if we start accepting this and starting to wrap our minds around it, we can start to integrate that into our lives and into the way that we process it. So when it does occur, it's not always a huge obstacle or a big scary threat that we have
Yeah.
to take on. It becomes something that becomes more manageable to us. I say this as someone who has not lost a parent, has not lost a sibling, has not lost like any nephews or nieces. So my experience is very different. There are others who maybe have, and it changes. That's why I say I think this journey is also very personal, and much as we can talk about like healthy ways and approaches, it doesn't mean it's going to make it any more easier whenever it becomes super personal or hits close to home.
Well, and I think, in some of the reading that I was doing just around like the art of living well and the art of dying well and those kinds of things, is oftentimes the grief of somebody's death for us, the bereaved, those left behind, is compounded by the grief of regret, the things that we left unsaid, the things that we did not do, the way that we did not prepare. That's why part of accepting that death is a part of everybody's reality, to me, is so important, because then once you really accept that and you stop ignoring it, you can begin to position yourself to live a little more courageously in that way, that you are not going to be left with all of this regret to have to contend with,
Yeah.
that we sort of combine in with the grief of death. When we think about when somebody has died and they've passed on, it is a sad thing, but also oftentimes there is this sadness of the things you wish you would have done differently, and the time you wish you would have spent. And when you talk to somebody who's really grappled with a lot of this already, while they're very sad that they no longer get to share their time with the individual, they don't really focus on the regret of all of the things they wish they would have done.
Right.
And I think that's the difference in, dying well and living well versus, just kind of haphazardly rolling through life trying to ignore the fact that death is inevitable for all of us.
Exactly. And I think a lot of the ways that we live our lives like help set us up for that in the future, as weird as that sounds. When it comes to decision making, a lot of my career has been in helping people try and make decisions, and sometimes not always easy decisions. And something that I always try to encourage people is, look, you have to be true to yourself. When you get up in the morning or before you go to bed, look in that mirror. Are you going to still be happy with the reflection that you're seeing, the choices that you as the individual looking into your reflection are okay with? And I think if we focus more on understanding the power of our actions in our day-to-day lives, it will help us better live that life of purpose and live in those moments, to allow for those conversations and things to be said that maybe we've left unsaid. Who wants to be at that end point and be like, oh my gosh, I needed to say this, or I wanted to say this, or I needed to have this conversation with them. It happens. Like, I'm not saying that it's not a real thing and people do experience it, but I think there's also like a level of being true to yourself
Yeah.
through
And I
life.
think I think that's where a lot of the rituals come into play around death through different cultures and societies. It's like this bereavement period that sort of puts a box around feelings so that it gives you a time to have these feelings and then to say it's okay to move on, but also this space where you are sort of communing with the person that has gone beyond, being able to share with others all of the things that you want to remember, let go of the regrets, focus on the positive, say the things that you didn't say before they passed on that you wish you would have said. I think a lot of the rituals are designed in ways to help us, because naturally we as people created all these rituals, right? So they're things that we do that help us, the bereaved, those left behind, move on in a way that allows us to move towards acceptance. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that. And when you think about like those pop culture references in Coco, around Dia de los Muertos, the emphasis is really on remembrance and connection across life and death, so that you can continue to visit and commune with and speak to those individuals that have gone beyond. And it's not like, hey, I've missed my opportunity to say the things I need to say.
Yeah, I like how you said that, like it puts the box around the feelings. I remember I heard about it, it was a different culture, like it wasn't here in the United States. And whenever I tried to find it, I couldn't find the exact reference, but I really like it and it has stuck with me. And it's this idea of putting a time frame on mourning.
Mm.
And by that, it means like feeling those strong emotions and really like that depth of like sadness that people can get into, putting a time period to that. And culturally, it was a year. You have a year to mourn their loss, because in a year, you go through the cycle that you would of a life. You
Mm.
birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and
A lot
you
of firsts in that first year.
exactly. And so it's like you feel that loss more within that first year because it's your first year without them. But then you move from that year of loss and sadness into remembrance and talking about the person in a celebratory, fun way and finding ways to include them. Like, it's not about mourning them anymore. It's about celebrating them. And I just thought it was such a beautiful way to kind of look at that, because growing up, I was constantly told by my loved ones, I don't want people to be sad when I die. I don't want there to be a lot of crying or, darkness, like things like that. And I'm just like, I think that's kind of selfish. Like, if I'm
I
being
want
honest, like,
you to be terribly sad. Just to be very clear, I think I've said this a number of times. I want you to be so devastated that you cannot get out of bed. And I do think that is selfish on my part.
I,
But
I
I want you to be sad, and I also want to be cremated and mixed with glitter and thrown everywhere so that I can live forever.
because we know that glitter lives forever.
It lives forever. So that's my master plan at avoiding death, is just to become glitter and live forever. But in all seriousness, I do think, there is a part of me that thinks like, okay, how do I like pre-mourn death of people I love and of, myself and all those things? Not that I'll be mourning after I die because, I won't be here. But like, how do I pre-mourn all those things so that like I just don't have to spend a year or, all of this time later being sad about it? And I mean, that is the equivalent to my how many yoga classes do I have to take before I'm fixed question. Like, it's just not, things don't work that way.
Right.
But I do think living with this awareness of mortality can really help you prioritize things in a way that you don't have to deal with the regret at the same time that you're dealing with the empty seat,
Yeah.
right? That lack of somebody being there.
Right.
And it can help that process just be a little easier to
Yeah.
get through. We might live differently if we believed our life will ripple beyond us, right? So, um, again, there's this like concept of purpose. What purpose? How can I leave my mark on the world? And I honestly, while that has always been a question that I have had within me, I also think that it's a way of humans to outsmart death by continuing to live on. I think about like William Shakespeare, for instance, continues to live on for many years, and he's made his mark, and he's like outsmarted death in this way. And but at the end of the day, like, is that serving William at all? Like, does it really
Right.
matter? Like, is that the right question? Is that the right thing for me to focus on, or is it really just like Epicurus would say, focusing on getting as much happiness out of life as possible while I am here living?
Yeah. And the way that I've recently heard this put, and I thought was like really like poetic, if you will, was around the legacy that
Yeah.
you leave behind. And it's not about the works that you did. It's not about the, however many companies you started or whatever. It's about like the loved ones in life that you touched
Mm,
who kind of carry you forward in those memories and in those interactions. And like, I show up to be a better person because I was afforded that by someone who is really important to me. And
yeah.
like this idea of legacy not being a tangible thing, but more of the impact that we have on one another. And I like that. And I think a lot of what we do and talk about here is around how we do that. How do we live to be true to ourselves, but also are able to connect with others in a way that is true and authentic to ourselves, but creates that real connection for others.
I mean, I do often wonder, though, is that because there is this fear of not mattering? Before we no longer exist, we are trying to make sure that we continue to matter on into the future.
Well, then couldn't you make the argument that life is a competition then?
I mean, spoken like a true competitor. No, but in all seriousness, I do think that it is my belief, your belief, that it is our life is best lived chasing the happiness of ourselves and others and
Yeah.
trying to support others in that journey of happiness through life. And so, not everyone, I think, holds that view, but that is our view and the lens with which we look at this conversation and all of the other conversations that we have. I love this suggestion that you brought of what if we built our own ofrenda? Talk about that.
Yeah, so the idea again of the ofrenda is to acknowledge and sit in the space with the ones that we've lost in the remembrance. And then this question that was posed was, what if you created one not just for a loved one, but maybe for a version of yourself that is lost or a dream that you left behind? This idea of understanding that life happens and we all are on this journey and we
Yeah.
have influences and things happen all around us that steer us into the life that we are in today. My interpretation of this is more about honoring what has brought you to this place and what opportunity continues to be ahead of you, and not seeing these things as lost and unattainable anymore. Maybe it's
Yeah.
just shifted or changed the way that we now engage with it. And I just thought it was a super interesting perspective at this idea of loss. Like we all experience it. We all like at different depths, I'm sure, but it is something that we all go through life. And did we become that singer we wanted to be? Did we become that actor that we wanted to be? Maybe not, but we can still honor that and we can still be true to ourselves in the remembrance of those dreams and desires.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when I think about this journey of about trying to find acceptance with the concept of death and, less fear of death or ignoring death. What I keep coming back to is spending time thinking about what is it that I'm focused on. Because if I'm focused on trying to find the answers to unanswerable questions, I'm probably going to stay stuck. And no one really can know what happens after death or what after death is like until they experience it. But if it's something that can't be experienced, it's like a circular question. And so, like, is
Yeah,
that really the right question? Does it really, can we ever, really factually determine what experiences happen after life? Like, that's not really possible. And so, whatever we choose to believe, is that really the right question? I spent a lot of time growing up thinking, well, how do I know? What, like, there's all these different religions and all of them talk about different experiences and things. And you're just sort of born into this life where religion gets passed to you. And so, how do you know that you landed in the right one? And, all these things, they just don't make sense. So, this nagging sort of back of my mind question has been, does it really matter? Is that really what matters? I'm not sure that what matters is what happens after life. I think that it's more about how we deal with life while we're living it, how we deal with death while we're living it. As much as I hate to say it, I think there's some meditation practice that I need to do around just accepting the fact that we all will die eventually, that there will be life without loved ones, and how do we live more wholly in a way that, um, we don't leave behind as many regrets when
right.
they pass.
Well, and I think that's the point of this conversation that we're having right now. It's
Yeah.
opening up, hopefully opening up this conversation to this taboo topic where we can focus on how we, reframe the way we look at this and find ways to honor the experiences and those who have been a part of this journey with us, to make it not this big scary thing, but rather how do we embrace it in a way that is true to ourselves and allows us that authentic connection with one another.
Yeah, it's not really about whether what I believe is right or not. It's more about how it's serving that process of helping to live the experience.
Right, exactly. And I loved there was this concept around reframing grief or death as learning, that the brain has to adapt to a new normal when something or someone is gone. I love that. I'd never heard it put that way before. I just thought like such a important symbolic way of thinking about it and allowing your time space in that area to learn because you're
Yeah.
learning something new.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you for going on this journey with me and for talking about death and you sharing your experience with Frank and getting to explore death through the eyes of another culture that you haven't yet explored that through. That's been very educational and eye-opening for
Yeah.
me, and I have really appreciated that. And thank you all of you who have stayed to tune in to this conversation. We, as we have mentioned, are on the journey. We are
Yeah.
in the process of really learning about how to live in a way that we're not avoiding death. If you have experiences or thoughts that you want to share, we would absolutely love to hear from you. We'd love to learn from you. Please definitely reach out, drop a comment wherever you're listening to this. Reach out to us via email. You can email us at chrisjeninthemorning@gmail.com or text us at 940-278-8129. We also have a new website we're very excited about, www.chrisandjenitm.com. And you can go on there and find all of the places you can follow us. You can leave us a message on the website. You can check in on what we've been doing, all sorts of things. So go check that out. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah, so reach out. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and all of the places you find us. That helps us stay connected. And yeah, let us know your thoughts as we move through one season of remembrance into a season of gratitude.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, until next time, be kind to yourself and to one another and make it a great week.
Bye, everyone.